Hello, my darlings. Mother Raven here with a charming little no-sleep for you. It's called Vikingur by seatown93. I'll be right up front here. If you're looking for terror, blood, and guts, screaming in the night, and terrifying abominations, this might not be the most interesting post to read, but I figure some might enjoy it anyway, because while this might have kept me awake more than a few nights, it's for a reason you might not expect. Last year, I took a summer job as a security officer for a museum in Denver. Specifically, they needed someone for the night shift. I'd done the same sort of job before, and working alone at ungodly hours of the day never bothered me. Besides, it was an easy gig. $20 an hour with weekends off, free admission to the museum, plus an opportunity to be rehired next summer if I didn't break anything. A friend of mine lived nearby and let me crash at their place over the summer if I helped pay for food and the like. Overall, a pretty sweet deal. Because of the valuable nature of some of the exhibits, as well as being in a not-so-nice area of the city, it was an armed position. No big deal. I supplied my own weapon, ammunition, and already had the training. Come mid-June, I showed up for my first night on the job. My shift started at 1900 and went to 0600. The supervisor ran me through all the pertinent stuff. The first, night alarm system, ID card scanners, cameras, etc., etc. All that was really asked of me was to do an exterior perimeter check once every hour and wander through the exhibits a few times a night, keeping an eye on the cameras in between. But as my boss put it before leaving, it's not like these old mannequins are going to give you any problems. Now, I'm not a believer in the paranormal. Every strange experience I've ever had could be chalked up to perfectly reasonable explanations. Even after watching horror movies all night, I could still go to sleep after cleaning my palate with some cat videos on YouTube without issue. But there's something to be said for wandering around in an empty museum at 0200, with the lights half dimmed, to save electricity I'm assuming, all by your lonesome. I made it a point each night to troll all of the exhibits, partly to fulfill my job obligations and also to ease any nagging sense of worry I may have had. I always had a peculiar whenever I walked through, as if something was there, but it wasn't malevolent. I never had the urge to run or hide or draw my Smith & Wesson and start pumping holes into the woolly mammoth exhibit, just that I wasn't quite alone. Halfway through my contract, in mid-July, I showed up to work to see a large truck parked outside. My supervisor was chatting with a few guys in work clothes who left shortly thereafter. They just put in a new temporary exhibit, he said, handing over the massive keyring. Guess the museum wants some more Viking stuff to go with that TV show. I found the exhibit on my first patrol of the evening, about halfway into the building, just around the corner from the security office, taking up what used to be a small sitting area. It was pretty small, a single mannequin garbed in what looked like some Viking warrior getup, with a spear in one hand and an axe in the other. There was also a small rowboat and a fake camp, which included tent and unlit fire pit. I have to admit, it was pretty cool. My family had immigrated to the U.S. from Norway only 2 generations ago, and had deep roots in Scandinavia, as my grandfather liked to call it. Seeing into the past of what could have been my family history was a fun break from the monotony. There was also a stand-up whiteboard set up next to the exhibit with the word Vikingur translated into English Viking just underneath that. Probably just a temporary placeholder until they could install the more formal sign. I didn't give it much more thought, aside from nicknaming the mannequin Leif Erikson for shits and giggles. After finishing my patrol, I went back to the security office and restarted Netflix, bringing the latest season of Longmire. That was until about 30 minutes later, when a massive clatter jolted me from my seat. I'd kept the door cracked open and could tell it was coming from down the hallway. Holding my flashlight in my left hand, the right subconsciously resting on the grip of my handgun, I slowly opened the door and swept the beam of light around the foyer. Nothing. But the noise had clearly come from inside the building, and I wasn't going to be able to relax until I figured out what it was. Paranoia is a bitch. My hand gripped the weapon a little tighter as I turned the corner, expecting to see a gang of robbers plundering one of the exhibits. Instead, I saw an empty room where the Viking was still standing, almost like some ancient guardian of Valhalla. Checking every door and window for the source of the noise, I was coming up empty-handed until I turned back around and saw the 7-foot-long spear previously in the mannequin's firm grip laying on the floor. It became clear what had happened as I approached. The shaft had been affixed to its plastic hand with a small strip of Velcro, one side on the spear, the other on his palm. "Real professional, guys," I muttered to myself, picking up the hunk of iron and oak and fitting it back into his grip, tilting it back slightly this time so it would stay in place. I was getting ready to head back to the office for another hour of good old Western justice when something caught my eye. The whiteboard was different. It actually took me a moment to notice, and when I did, my heart almost dropped out of my chest. There was now a question mark scrawled next to the Vikingur. I actually rubbed my eyes like I was in some cheesy horror film. I could have sworn that the question mark hadn't been there before. But then again, I was getting tired, not having near enough coffee yet. It was 0400 hours when I made my next patrol, having almost forgotten about the dropped spear and smudged whiteboard. That was until I passed the exhibit on my way back and stopped dead in my tracks. Yay, Viking! There was no freaking way that first word had been there before. My blood was replaced with ice as I stepped forward, glancing fervently between the sign and the mannequin. He was still staring straight ahead, fake blue eyes gazing out into the distance. Pulling out my phone, I started running the phrase through every language on Google Translate and eventually hit pay dirt. Icelandic. It came back as, "I am Viking." I picked up the dry erase marker hanging by the sign, realizing just how crazy this notion was. But I had to at least try, for no other reason than to convince myself I wasn't going utterly crazy insane. Wiping off the board, I scrawled on the surface while glancing at the website on my phone. "The F do. Who are you?" I set the marker back down and stepped back, waiting for just a few moments before walking towards the office, glancing over my shoulder more than once. I lasted all of 10 minutes before the combination of fear and curiosity got the better of me. My footsteps echoed down the hallway, seeming louder than usual as I approached the exhibit, and yet my whole body froze as I saw the sign. "Jeg er Viking," written in capital letters this time. When I looked up at the man dressed in his scale, mail, and steel helmet this time, I swore I saw something flash in those eyes of his. Something alive. I ran a hand down my face and sighed nervously. Now that feeling of not being alone was stronger as ever. There, it was stronger than ever. Like there was something standing right next to me. A strong, heavy presence, but not one of malice. Almost a sense of strange curiosity. Yet again, I picked up the pen with a trembling hand and wrote, "Vad heter du? What is your name?" This time I didn't even bother going back to the office. Instead, just walked around the corner to wait a few moments before almost running back. The pen was still swinging from the lanyard holding it to the board this time. "Hrothgar, efter ovenur." Yet again, Google Translate to the rescue. "Hrothgar, are you enemy?" "Ingen, no." I followed the same routine as before and was rewarded yet again by a new message. "Efu fordandamardu, are you guardian?" I glanced down at the cheap security badge I wore on my belt next to my gun. Close enough. "Ja." Testing my limits, this time I only walked a few paces down the hall. Coming back around the corner, I saw the pen seemingly drop out of thin air. This message was a bit longer. Ho et viner pa. Kom af samme blod. Vi skånem håfa sammen, ja. You are friend then. Come of same blood. We stand watch together, yes? I couldn't help but smile a bit and chuckle, scrawling my response, yeah. Hrothgar stayed a good friend of mine throughout the summer. He would regale me with stories of the battles he'd fought, women he'd been with, sons he'd fathered. Once I asked him why he was here, and all he said in response was, Spjot, spear. I spent more than a few nights looking over the weapon. With his permission, of course. It looked like the only true artifact out of all of the display pieces. Ancient oak and a chipped iron head, but real nonetheless. It quickly became clear to me that it meant a great deal to him. We stood watch together every night, watching the sun come up. Towards the end of my contract, I asked him again what was keeping him here and why he didn't ascend to Valhalla. His words, not mine. Hrothgar explained that in the battle where he had died, an enemy had knocked the spear from his hand before being killed, and that because he had died without a weapon in his hand, he was doomed to inhabit the earth until the weapon had drawn its last blood. And so, on my last night, after a long conversation, I set him free. As the sun began to rise, I reached up and pressed my finger against the ancient iron spear until it drew blood. I went back to the office afterwards, gathering my gear, before making one last patrol. And on that whiteboard was written the single phrase, Bakkapirs. Thank you. Smiling, I patted the mannequin on the shoulder before wiping it clean and writing one last message. Jeg Viking. Thank you, my darlings. I hope you enjoyed this wonderful little story, and I hope I didn't slaughter the Icelandic language too terribly. If I did, please chew me out in the comments. But if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. And I will see you next time, my darlings, under the trees.